A warm namaste and welcome to RAM Edge Labs. Namaskar. You're listening to RAM Edge Labs, where we try to explain important topics related to knowledge, Indian culture, spirituality, and life in a simple and easy to understand way. Today, we are going to discuss a very deep and important subject. So, let us begin. Today, we are going to undertake a deep and meaningful journey into one of the most important concepts of Indian philosophy and spiritual thought, Dharma. The word Dharma is very ancient, very profound, and very difficult to translate into a single English word. Dharma is often translated as religion, duty, righteousness, morality, law, or ethical conduct. But Dharma is much greater than any one of these meanings. Dharma is the principle that sustains life. Dharma is the principle that maintains order. Dharma is the path of truth, responsibility, righteousness, compassion, discipline, and spiritual growth. Dharma asks a fundamental question. How should a human being live? What is right? What is wrong? What is our responsibility toward ourselves? What is our responsibility toward our family? What is our responsibility toward society? What is our responsibility toward nature? And ultimately, what is our responsibility toward the divine? These questions form the foundation of the idea of Dharma. When we look at Indian spiritual traditions, we find that Dharma is not merely a religious identity. A person may belong to a particular religious tradition, but Dharma concerns the deeper principles by which that person lives. Truthfulness, compassion, justice, self-control, responsibility, service, purity of intention, respect for life, and the search for ultimate truth. Dharma therefore operates at many levels. There is personal Dharma, there is family Dharma, there is social Dharma, there is professional Dharma, there is national Dharma, there is universal Dharma, and there is spiritual Dharma. At the deepest level, Dharma becomes connected with the journey from ordinary human consciousness towards self-knowledge and liberation. To understand Dharma, therefore, we must understand not only religion, but also human nature, action, consciousness, morality, society, spirituality, and liberation. Let us begin with the meaning of the word itself. The Sanskrit word dharma comes from the root dh, meaning to hold, to support, to sustain, or to uphold. Therefore, Dharma can be understood as that which sustains and supports. It sustains the individual. It sustains society. It sustains the natural order. And at the highest level, it sustains the harmony between human life and cosmic reality. This is why Dharma has such a central place in Indian philosophy. Dharma is not simply about what we believe. It is about how we live. A person may know thousands of religious teachings, but if that knowledge does not produce compassion, honesty, self-control, and wisdom, then the deeper purpose of Dharma has not been fulfilled. Dharma therefore begins with conduct. It continues through self-discipline. It develops through wisdom. And ultimately it leads toward realization. One of the most important ideas associated with Dharma is truth. Truth is not merely speaking factual words. Truth also means living in alignment with reality. When our thoughts, words, and actions become increasingly aligned with truth, our life becomes more harmonious. When we constantly lie, deceive, exploit, manipulate, or act from selfishness, our inner world becomes disturbed. Therefore, Dharma and truth are deeply connected. Another important concept is karma. Dharma tells us what kind of action is righteous. Karma refers to action and its consequences. Every action leaves an impression. Every decision influences our future. Every thought, word, and action contributes to the direction of our life. Therefore, Dharma provides a moral and spiritual framework for karma. If our actions are guided by selfishness, greed, hatred, and ignorance, they create consequences that bind us. If our actions are guided by truth, compassion, service, and wisdom, they contribute toward purification and spiritual growth. This is why the relationship between dharma and karma is so important. The Bhagavad Gita gives one of the most powerful discussions of Dharma. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna experiences a profound moral and emotional crisis. He does not want to fight. He sees teachers, relatives, and friends on both sides. His mind becomes confused. He asks Krishna what he should do. The answer given by Krishna becomes one of the greatest spiritual discussions in human history. Krishna teaches Arjuna about dharma, karma, duty, detachment, knowledge, devotion, meditation, and liberation. One of the central teachings is that a person should perform their rightful duty without attachment to the fruits of action. This is the principle of Nishkama Karma. It does not mean that action is unimportant. It means that we should act correctly without allowing selfish attachment to control our actions. This principle is extremely relevant even today. A teacher should teach sincerely. A doctor should serve patients sincerely. An engineer should perform responsible work. A parent should care for children. A leader should protect those entrusted to them. A citizen should contribute to society. A spiritual seeker should pursue truth. Dharma is therefore not necessarily something extraordinary. Often dharma exists in ordinary responsibilities. The greatness of dharma lies in the consciousness with which we perform our responsibilities. The same action can have different spiritual qualities depending upon the intention behind it. Helping someone for praise is different from helping someone out of compassion. Giving charity for recognition is different from giving because another person is genuinely suffering. Working only for personal gain is different from performing one's work with integrity and responsibility. Dharma therefore involves both action and intention. This brings us to another important concept, Swadharma. Swadharma means one's own dharma or one's appropriate duty. Every person has different circumstances, abilities, responsibilities, and stages of life. Therefore, dharma cannot always be reduced to one identical rule for everyone. A person's responsibility toward their parents may differ from another person's. A teacher's responsibility differs from that of a soldier. A doctor's responsibility differs from that of a judge. A parent's responsibility differs from that of a student. Yet all these responsibilities can be performed according to universal principles such as truthfulness, compassion, justice, and integrity. This is why dharma has both universal and contextual dimensions. There are principles that apply broadly to humanity, and there are responsibilities that depend upon one's particular situation. The Indian philosophical tradition also discusses the idea of Sanatan Dharma. The word Sanatan means eternal or timeless. In a broad philosophical sense, Sanatan Dharma can refer to eternal principles of existence and righteous living. These principles are not necessarily dependent upon one historical event or one individual. They concern the relationship between human beings, the universe, morality, and ultimate reality. Concepts such as truth, compassion, self-control, non-attachment, purity, and the pursuit of knowledge appear repeatedly in Indian spiritual literature. Dharma is also connected with the ashram system, which describes different stages of human life. Traditionally, these are Brahmacharya, the student stage, Grihastha, the householder stage, Vanprastha, the stage of gradual withdrawal, Sannyasa, the stage of renunciation. Each stage has its own responsibilities. The student is expected to learn and develop discipline. The householder is expected to support family and society. The later stages emphasize reflection, detachment, and spiritual pursuit. This framework demonstrates an important principle. Dharma changes according to the stage and circumstances of life. A child's responsibilities are not the same as those of an adult. A young person's responsibilities are not the same as those of an elderly person. Therefore, dharma requires wisdom and discrimination. This leads to another important Sanskrit concept, viveka, discrimination or discernment. Sometimes two duties appear to conflict. Sometimes telling the truth may cause immediate harm. Sometimes remaining silent may permit injustice. Sometimes personal responsibility may conflict with social responsibility. In such situations, dharma cannot be understood merely by mechanically following a rule. We require wisdom. We require compassion. We require awareness of consequences. We require an understanding of the deeper purpose of the action. This is why Indian philosophical traditions repeatedly emphasize dharma with viveka. Dharma without wisdom can become rigid, and wisdom without ethical responsibility can become selfish intellectualism. The ideal is a combination of wisdom and righteous action. Dharma is also closely connected with ahimsa or non-violence. Ahimsa means avoiding unnecessary harm to living beings. But ahimsa is not simply physical non-violence. It also includes speech and thought. Words can injure. Hatred can destroy relationships. Cruel thoughts can influence behavior. Therefore, dharma asks us to develop compassion at every level. Another major principle is daya, compassion. A person following dharma does not live only for personal benefit. They recognize the suffering of others. This leads naturally to seva, service. Service is one of the most beautiful expressions of dharma. When we help someone without expecting personal reward, we reduce selfishness. When we share food with someone who is hungry, we practice dharma. When we educate someone who lacks opportunity, we practice dharma. When we protect nature, we practice dharma. When we care for parents, children, and vulnerable people, we practice dharma. When we stand against injustice with wisdom and courage, we practice dharma. Dharma therefore becomes visible through our behavior. Another important principle is dana, giving. Giving does not only mean money. We can give time. We can give knowledge. We can give attention. We can give emotional support. We can give food. We can give protection. We can give forgiveness. The highest form of giving is giving without ego. Dharma also requires shaucha, purity. Purity has both external and internal dimensions. External cleanliness is important, but inner cleanliness is equally important. We must examine greed. We must examine jealousy. We must examine hatred. We must examine excessive attachment. We must examine pride. We must examine selfishness. Spiritual dharma is therefore also an internal purification process. This brings us to dharma and spirituality. Religion may provide rituals, traditions, symbols, scriptures, and institutions. Spirituality asks a deeper question. Who am I? What is consciousness? What is the nature of reality? What is the relationship between the individual self and the ultimate reality? Dharma provides a foundation for this spiritual journey. A disturbed and unethical life makes deep meditation difficult. If the mind is constantly filled with dishonesty, hatred, and selfishness, inner peace becomes difficult. Therefore, ethical living prepares the mind for spiritual practice. This principle can be understood through the traditional relationship between dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. These are often described as the four purusharthas, or major aims of human life. Dharma represents righteousness and responsible living. Artha represents material prosperity and resources. Kama represents legitimate desires, enjoyment, and emotional fulfillment. Moksha represents liberation. The important point is that these aims should exist in harmony. Material prosperity is not necessarily against dharma. Enjoyment is not necessarily against dharma. The problem arises when artha and kama become disconnected from dharma. When wealth becomes more important than ethics, corruption can arise. When desire becomes more important than responsibility, suffering can arise. Dharma provides the balancing principle, and ultimately, dharma supports the journey toward moksha. Moksha means liberation. Liberation from ignorance. Liberation from destructive attachment. Liberation from the cycle of bondage. Liberation from mistaken identification with the limited ego. Different Indian philosophical schools explain moksha differently. But the common theme is freedom from ignorance and suffering and realization of ultimate truth. Therefore, Dharma is not merely social morality. At its deepest level, Dharma becomes part of the spiritual journey toward liberation. The individual begins by learning how to live rightly. Then the person learns to control the mind, then develops wisdom, then reduces attachment, then seeks self-knowledge, and ultimately moves toward liberation. This is why Dharma can be understood as both a foundation and a path. It is the foundation of ethical life. It is the path toward inner transformation, and it can become a bridge toward spiritual realization. Now let us ask an important question. What is the purpose of Dharma? The first purpose is to create harmony. Harmony within the individual. Harmony within the family. Harmony within society. Harmony with nature. And ultimately harmony with the deeper reality of existence. The second purpose is to control selfishness. Human beings naturally have desires. Desire itself is not always wrong. But uncontrolled desire can become greed. Greed can become exploitation. Exploitation can create suffering. Dharma teaches us how to regulate desire. The third purpose is to develop character. Character is not created by words. It is created by repeated actions. Honesty practiced repeatedly becomes integrity. Compassion practiced repeatedly becomes kindness. Discipline practiced repeatedly becomes strength. Service practiced repeatedly becomes humility. Dharma therefore shapes character. The fourth purpose is social stability. Society cannot survive only through laws. Laws can control behavior externally. Dharma creates internal responsibility. A person who follows Dharma does the right thing even when nobody is watching. This is one of the most important distinctions between external law and internal ethics. The fifth purpose is spiritual evolution. Dharma gradually transforms the individual from selfish consciousness toward a more universal consciousness. The question changes from, what can I get? To, what can I contribute? Then from, how can I win? To, what is right? And ultimately, who am I? This is the spiritual evolution of Dharma. Dharma also teaches us about responsibility toward nature. Ancient Indian traditions often viewed nature as sacred. Rivers were revered. Mountains were revered. Trees were respected. Animals were included within the moral universe. The earth was regarded as a mother. This worldview has an important lesson for the modern world. Human beings cannot survive independently of nature. Air, water, soil, forests, animals, and ecosystems support human life. Therefore, environmental responsibility can also be understood as dharma. Protecting nature is not merely an environmental policy. It is a responsibility toward future generations. Now let us consider dharma in everyday life. Suppose a person is at work. Their dharma is not simply to complete tasks. It includes honesty, quality, responsibility, and respect toward colleagues. Suppose someone is a parent. Their dharma includes caring for children, educating them, protecting them, and helping them develop good character. Suppose someone is a student. Their dharma includes learning sincerely, respecting teachers, and developing discipline. Suppose someone is a citizen. Their dharma includes respecting others, following just laws, protecting public resources, and contributing to society. Suppose someone is wealthy. Their dharma includes using resources responsibly and helping society where possible. Suppose someone has authority. Their dharma becomes even greater because power creates responsibility. A leader who uses power for personal benefit violates the deeper principle of dharma. A leader who protects people and acts with justice fulfills dharma. Therefore, the greater our power, the greater our responsibility. This principle is extremely important. Dharma is not about privilege. Dharma is about responsibility. Now we must also understand what dharma is not. Dharma is not blind obedience. Dharma is not hatred toward people of another tradition. Dharma is not exploitation. Dharma is not superstition. Dharma is not merely external ritual. Dharma is not a license for injustice. Dharma is not ego disguised as religion. A person may perform many rituals and still act against dharma if their behavior is cruel and dishonest. Similarly, a person who performs service, practices compassion, and lives truthfully may be expressing the deeper spirit of dharma. This is why intention and conduct are so important. The mystery of dharma lies partly here. Dharma cannot always be reduced to a simple list of rules. Life is complex. Circumstances change. Responsibilities conflict. Human beings have different capacities. Therefore, dharma requires awareness, wisdom, and compassion. The ancient Indian tradition contains many stories where characters face difficult moral choices. The Mahabharata is particularly rich in such examples. The story repeatedly asks, what happens when different forms of dharma conflict? What is the dharma of a king? What is the dharma of a warrior? What is the dharma of a teacher? What is the dharma of a family member? What happens when personal loyalty conflicts with justice? These questions make dharma a living philosophical problem rather than merely a theoretical concept. The Ramayana also presents many discussions about dharma. Lord Rama is traditionally associated with the ideal of righteous conduct. The story examines duty toward parents, family, kingdom, society, and truth. Again, dharma is shown through difficult decisions. This teaches us that dharma often requires sacrifice. Sometimes doing what is right may not be the easiest choice. Sometimes dharma requires giving up personal comfort. Sometimes dharma requires courage. Sometimes dharma requires forgiveness. Sometimes dharma requires restraint. And sometimes dharma requires action against injustice. Therefore, dharma cannot simply mean being nice. Dharma means doing what is right with wisdom and responsibility. This is an important distinction. Compassion without wisdom can sometimes create unintended harm. Justice without compassion can become cruelty. Courage without wisdom can become aggression. Knowledge without humility can become arrogance. Dharma seeks balance. Balance between strength and compassion. Balance between personal freedom and social responsibility. Balance between material life and spiritual life. Balance between action and contemplation. Balance between desire and discipline. Balance between individuality and unity. This balance is one of the deepest meanings of dharma. Now let us explore the relationship between dharma and meditation. Meditation is not merely sitting quietly. Meditation develops awareness. When awareness increases, we begin to see our thoughts, emotions, and impulses. We recognize anger before acting on it. We recognize greed before allowing it to control us. We recognize fear before it becomes destructive. We recognize attachment before it becomes dependency. Therefore, meditation strengthens our ability to live according to dharma. Similarly, dharma supports meditation. When we live ethically, the mind becomes more peaceful. When we live dishonestly, the mind becomes disturbed. Thus, dharma and meditation reinforce each other. Dharma purifies life. Meditation purifies consciousness. Together they support spiritual growth. Now let us discuss dharma and bhakti. Bhakti means devotion. A devotee sees the divine as the highest reality and develops love, surrender, and remembrance. Dharma gives structure to this devotion. True devotion should produce compassion. True devotion should produce humility. True devotion should produce service. If devotion increases ego, hatred, and superiority, then its spiritual purpose has been misunderstood. This is why many Indian saints emphasized that love of God must become love of humanity. Dharma and bhakti therefore meet in service. Now consider dharma and jnana, or knowledge. Jnana means spiritual knowledge. The seeker asks, who am I? Am I merely the body? Am I the mind? What is consciousness? What is the self? What is Brahman? What is reality? Dharma prepares the seeker for this inquiry. A disciplined, ethical, and relatively peaceful mind is better prepared for deep self-inquiry. Therefore, Dharma is often considered foundational to Jnana. Now consider Dharma and Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga emphasizes control and refinement of the mind. Ethical principles are foundational to this path. Without self-control and disciplined conduct, meditation can become difficult. Thus, Dharma is not separate from yoga. It supports yoga. In fact, the word yoga itself means union. The deeper purpose of spiritual practice is to overcome fragmentation and realize a deeper unity. Dharma helps create the conditions for that realization. Now let us ask, how can an ordinary person follow Dharma today? The answer does not require withdrawing from society. Begin with truth. Speak truthfully. Do not deliberately deceive people. Second, practice responsibility. Do what you have promised. Third, practice compassion. Notice the suffering of others. Fourth, control unnecessary anger. Fifth, avoid exploitation. Sixth, earn honestly. Seventh, share when possible. Eighth, respect parents, teachers, elders, and all human beings. Ninth, protect nature. 10th, practice some form of self-reflection or meditation. And most importantly, examine your intentions. Ask yourself every day, did my actions create unnecessary suffering? Did I act honestly? Did I help someone? Did I control my anger? Did I allow greed to control me? Did I treat people with respect? Did I perform my responsibilities sincerely? These questions can transform Dharma from a philosophical concept into a living practice. There is another important aspect of Dharma, inner Dharma. External Dharma concerns our actions. Inner Dharma concerns our consciousness. A person may appear disciplined externally, but remain filled with hatred internally. Spiritual development requires both. Therefore, Dharma is not simply about appearance. It is about transformation. The ultimate Dharma may be described as living in harmony with truth. Truth about ourselves, truth about others, truth about the world, and ultimately truth about reality. As self-knowledge deepens, the boundaries of selfish identity begin to soften. We begin to see that our happiness is connected with the happiness of others. We begin to understand that compassion is not weakness. We understand that service does not diminish us. We understand that humility is strength. We understand that forgiveness can free the mind. And we begin to experience spirituality not as an external identity, but as an inner state of consciousness. This leads us toward the deepest mystery of Dharma. Is Dharma something imposed upon us? Or is it something discovered within us? At the ordinary level, society teaches duties and responsibilities. But at the deeper level, Dharma must be understood through awareness. The more deeply we understand life, the more naturally we recognize the value of truth, compassion, and responsibility. Dharma therefore begins as instruction. It becomes discipline. It develops into character. It becomes wisdom. And eventually it can become spontaneous, righteous living. At the highest level, a person does not need to constantly ask, what rule should I follow? Their consciousness itself becomes aligned with Dharma. Their thoughts become compassionate. Their words become truthful. Their actions become beneficial. Their presence becomes peaceful. This is one of the highest ideals of spiritual life. The person becomes a source of Dharma rather than merely a follower of Dharma. The journey from ignorance to wisdom is therefore also a journey from external Dharma to internal Dharma, from rule to understanding, from obligation to responsibility, from responsibility to love, from love to unity, and from unity to spiritual realization. This is why Dharma remains relevant even in the modern age. Technology has changed. Communication has changed. Economics has changed. Society has changed. But human problems remain. Greed remains. Anger remains. Fear remains. Jealousy remains. Attachment remains. Ego remains. Therefore, the need for Dharma remains. In a world of rapidly increasing technology, dharma may become even more important. Technology gives human beings greater power, but power without wisdom can become dangerous. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nuclear technology, and advanced communication systems can create enormous benefits, but they also create enormous responsibilities. Therefore, modern civilization needs not only technological intelligence, but ethical intelligence. This is another way of understanding dharma. Dharma asks, just because we can do something, should we do it? Just because something is profitable, is it right? Just because something is legal, is it ethical? Just because something is popular, is it beneficial? These questions are deeply connected with dharma. Therefore, dharma can guide modern humanity toward responsible progress. Dharma also has relevance in business. A business should not only ask, how much profit can we make? It should also ask, are we treating employees fairly? Are we deceiving customers? Are we damaging the environment? Are we creating useful products? Are we paying fairly? Are we fulfilling our responsibilities? Profit without dharma can become exploitation. Profit guided by dharma can become sustainable prosperity. The same principle applies to politics. Leadership without dharma can become corruption. Leadership with dharma can become service. The same applies to education. Education without dharma can create intelligent but selfish people. Education with dharma can create wise and responsible human beings. Therefore, dharma is not opposed to modern life. It gives modern life an ethical foundation. Now let us return to the individual. Every human being experiences moments when they must choose between convenience and responsibility. These small choices shape our character. Returning extra money when someone accidentally gives too much. Speaking honestly when lying would be easier. Helping someone when nobody will reward us. Refusing to participate in corruption. Protecting someone who is vulnerable. Admitting our mistake. Forgiving someone. Keeping a promise. These may appear to be small actions, but they are expressions of dharma. A person's dharma is built through thousands of such choices. Character is not created in one dramatic moment. It is created through repeated decisions. Therefore, dharma is practiced every day. Every thought is an opportunity. Every word is an opportunity. Every action is an opportunity. Every relationship is an opportunity. Every difficulty is an opportunity. Every responsibility is an opportunity for spiritual growth. Even suffering can become a teacher. When we experience difficulty, we may ask, what is this teaching me? How can I respond with wisdom rather than anger? How can I transform suffering into understanding? This does not mean that suffering is always desirable. It means that consciousness can transform the way we respond to suffering. This is another important spiritual dimension of dharma. Dharma does not promise a life without difficulty. It teaches us how to live rightly even when life is difficult. This is why dharma is closely connected with courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting according to what is right despite fear. The Bhagavad Gita presents this beautifully through Arjuna's crisis. The problem is not simply whether to fight. The deeper problem is confusion about responsibility, attachment, fear, and moral duty. Krishna's teaching is ultimately about clarity. When clarity comes, action becomes possible. This is why dharma requires inner clarity. Now let us consider the relationship between dharma and moksha one final time. If dharma is responsible living, why should it lead to liberation? Because righteous living gradually purifies consciousness. When selfishness decreases, attachment decreases. When attachment decreases, fear decreases. When fear decreases, awareness increases. When awareness increases, self-knowledge becomes possible. And when self-knowledge becomes established, the person begins to recognize a reality deeper than the ego. This is the spiritual movement toward moksha. Therefore, dharma can be seen as the foundation. Karma becomes the field of action. Yoga becomes the discipline. Jnana becomes the understanding. Bhakti becomes the love. and moksha becomes liberation. These concepts are not necessarily isolated. They can support one another. This integrated vision is one of the great strengths of Indian spiritual philosophy. Finally, what is the secret of Dharma? Perhaps the deepest secret is that Dharma is not primarily about controlling others. It begins with controlling ourselves. It is easy to say, you should behave correctly. It is harder to ask, am I behaving correctly? It is easy to criticize society. It is harder to transform ourselves. It is easy to demand respect. It is harder to give respect. It is easy to speak about spirituality. It is harder to live with compassion. Dharma begins when we turn the question inward. What is my responsibility? What is the right action? What is my intention? Am I creating suffering or reducing it? Am I living in truth or illusion? Am I controlled by ego or guided by wisdom? These questions gradually awaken the individual. And perhaps this awakening is the deepest purpose of Dharma. Dharma is not merely a word. It is a way of living. It is a way of thinking. It is a way of relating. It is a way of serving. It is a way of understanding. And ultimately, it can become a way of awakening. When Dharma enters family life, relationships become more responsible. When Dharma enters society, justice becomes stronger. When Dharma enters business, integrity becomes stronger. When Dharma enters politics, leadership becomes service. When Dharma enters education, knowledge becomes wisdom. When Dharma enters spirituality, practice becomes transformation. And when Dharma enters the individual heart, life begins to move from selfishness toward compassion, from confusion toward clarity, from attachment toward freedom, and from ignorance toward knowledge. The great message of Dharma is therefore simple but profound. Live truthfully, act responsibly, love compassionately, serve selflessly, control the mind, respect life, seek wisdom, remember the divine, and continue the journey toward self-realization. Dharma does not necessarily ask us to abandon the world. It asks us to transform the way we live in the world. It does not ask us merely to change our identity. It asks us to change our consciousness. It does not ask us only to believe. It asks us to experience. And ultimately, it asks us to discover the truth within ourselves. This is why Dharma has survived thousands of years of historical change. Because its deepest questions remain human questions. Who am I? How should I live? What is right? What is truth? What is my responsibility? What is the purpose of life? What lies beyond the ego? And finally, what is the ultimate reality? The journey toward these questions is itself a spiritual journey. And Dharma is one of the great paths that guides humanity through that journey. So, if we want to summarize Dharma in a few words, we can say, Dharma is living in harmony with truth, responsibility, compassion, wisdom, and the deeper order of existence. Dharma is not merely what we say. Dharma is what we practice. Dharma is not merely what we believe. Dharma is what we become. And perhaps the greatest expression of Dharma is this. May my thoughts create less suffering. May my words carry truth. May my actions become service. May my knowledge become wisdom. May my life become useful to others. And may my journey ultimately lead from ignorance to self-knowledge and from bondage to freedom. This is the deeper mystery of Dharma. Thank you for joining this journey. If you found this exploration meaningful, share it with others who are interested in Indian philosophy, spirituality, self-knowledge, and the deeper purpose of human life. And remember, Dharma is not only a path to follow. Dharma is a life to be lived.